It was the silence that arrived first, not the gentle quiet of a sleeping village or the peaceful hush of a snow-filled forest, but a profound, unnatural void that fell over the Alpine Valley at precisely 3:17 p.m. on October 14th, 1928. It was a silence so absolute it had a physical weight, pressing down on the cobblestone streets of St. Prex and muffling the distant bleating of sheep. The scheduled 1:20 p.m. Ethelred Express from Geneva to Milan was 17 minutes behind schedule, a minor delay noted with a flick of a pen in the Lausanne dispatcher's log. But its distinctive, labored chug, a sound as familiar and reassuring to the valley's inhabitants as their own heartbeats, was absent. The wires from the dispatcher's office hummed with empty static. The signal boxes along the final, treacherous stretch of track, a winding path carved into the sheer face of the mountain, known as the Wolf's Jaw, remained stubbornly, inexplicably set to green. The Ethelred Express, a gleaming 12-carriage jewel of European engineering with 73 souls aboard, had not simply been delayed. It had been erased from the face of the earth. It entered the cold, dark mouth of the Mont-Vaud tunnel, a passage barely a kilometer long, and it never emerged. There was no screech of tortured metal, no fiery cataclysm, no scatter of luggage or splintered wood across the pine-studded slopes. No cry of survivors echoed in the thin mountain air, just the cold, damp arch of the tunnel, breathing out a thin, persistent plume of morning mist and an emptiness that stretched for miles down the silent, vacant tracks. The official report, published after a 6-month charade of an investigation, would conclusively label an avalanche, a tragic, unforeseeable act of God that had swept the entire train from the tracks and into a deep, inaccessible crevasse, burying all evidence under 1 million tons of snow and rock. But the villagers, people born of the mountain, who understood its moods and its treacheries, knew this was a lie woven for the comfort of those far away. They knew the sound of an avalanche, the low, building rumble that shook the very foundations of the world, and they had heard nothing that day. And they knew something else, something that never made it into the official, leather-bound ledgers. The snow at the tunnel's entrance was pristine, unmarked by any great fall or slide. There are no scars on the mountain's face. The train hadn't been pushed. It had been swallowed whole. Before we descend into the chilling mystery of the Wolf's Jaw, I want you to consider this. A train is more than steel and steam. It is a contained world, a microcosm of society hurtling through space. Within its carriages are love affairs blooming in first-class compartments, desperate business deals being brokered over fine cigars, secrets held close in the hearts of solitary travelers, and sins waiting to be confessed. All of it is temporarily suspended from the outside world, a collection of intertwined destinies racing towards a shared horizon. What happens when that world simply stops? When every story, every life, every hope and fear is cut off not with a definitive period, but with a haunting, eternal question mark. In the comments below, I want you to drop one word. Just one. The first theory that comes to your mind when you ponder that emptiness. Avalanche, sabotage, supernatural, mistake. Let's see where our collective instinct lies as we step back into the cold, gathering fog of 1928. The investigation began, as it must, with the assumption of a catastrophic crash. Search parties, armed with picks, shovels, and a growing, gnawing sense of dread, scoured the vertiginous slopes below the Mont-Vaud tunnel for days. They braved icy winds and precarious ledges, their calls echoing into a void that gave no answer. They found nothing, not a single piece of twisted metal, not a shred of fabric from the plush velvet seats, not a single page from a book or a child's lost toy. The train, from its powerful, panting locomotive to the last, humble baggage car, had vanished without a trace. The only clue, if it could be called that, was a single, anomalous reading from the Lausanne signal box. At 3:16 p.m., 1 minute before the silence fell, the electrical current on the track circuit for the Mont-Vaud tunnel had flickered. Not a failure, the veteran signalman would insist. his voice trembling with a fear his superiors dismissed as superstition. It was a surge, a brief, impossible surge of power, as if something immense and ravenous had drawn a final, gasping breath of energy from the line before the connection was severed, plunging the board into a dead and silent green. The passenger manifest, when it was finally compiled, was a poignant portrait of a lost, elegant era. There was Lord Alastair Harrington, a wealthy and influential British industrialist returning from a secretive meeting in Geneva, his reinforced leather briefcase rumored to contain blueprints that could alter the balance of the European arms industry. There was Madame Hilaire Voss, a celebrated and controversial Viennese psychic traveling with her nervous, devoted personal secretary, claiming to be fleeing a specific and terrifying premonition of great personal danger. There was Professor Henrik Vogler, a brilliant and eccentric Oxford geologist carrying sensitive core samples from a geologically disputed region of the Alps. And there was a man traveling under the name of Mr. John Smith, a quiet, unassuming American whose passport, upon later, more thorough inspection, was revealed to be a masterful, nearly undetectable forgery. But the heart of this story, the fragile key that would eventually begin to turn the rusted lock of this mystery, was not among the rich or the famous. It was a family, the Lawrence, Émile Laurent, a meticulous watchmaker from Lyon with ink-stained fingers and a gentle disposition, his wife Isabel, whose laughter was said to be like the ringing of a small, clear bell, and their 7-year-old daughter, Sophie. They were seated in a third-class carriage, the air thick with the smell of packed bodies and cheap tobacco, heading to Milan to visit ailing relatives. They were ordinary. They were insignificant to the wider world. And it was Sophie Lawrence's tiny, leather-bound diary, with a small, brass clasp in the shape of a butterfly, discovered not by the official search parties, but by a solitary shepherd boy named Luca a full, mournful year after the disappearance, that would tear the official, comfortable narrative into irreparable shreds. The diary was found nestled between two moss-covered rocks in a high, remote meadow, a place no search party had thought to look, over a mile from the railway line and 500 vertical feet above it. It was weathered, its pages warped by damp and frozen by winter, but the faint, pencil-smudged script of a child's hand was still painfully legible. The final entry, dated October 14th, contained a simple, devastating observation. Papa is nervous. He keeps looking at the tall man in the black coat who got on at the last stop. The man with the shiny watch who doesn't tell the time. Mama says I am imagining things, and to finish my drawing. But I saw the watch. It had no numbers, just little spinning stars inside. Papa says not to stare. The tall man in the black coat was not on the passenger manifest. This single, scribbled paragraph was a spark in the overwhelming dark. It suggested that the disappearance was not a passive accident, but a deliberate act with an active agent. That there was a player on the train who did not belong, a phantom passenger with a strange, impossible timepiece. The focus of the few remaining curious minds shifted from an act of God to an act of man. The case was no longer about finding wreckage. It was about finding a ghost. The official inquest, under immense pressure to provide a final, palatable answer to a nervous public, clung to the Avalanche theory with desperate tenacity. They dismissed the diary as the fanciful imagination of a frightened child, a story concocted to make sense of a terrifying final moment. The pristine, unbroken snow at the tunnel entrance was explained away by a hypothetical, subsequent, smaller snowfall that had, with perfect convenience, covered all evidence of the initial cataclysm. The power surge was blandly attributed to faulty, aging signal equipment. The file on the Ethelred Express was officially, firmly closed, and the world, desperate for closure and order, largely accepted it. The train became a legend, a ghost story to tell around crackling fires. But for a handful of individuals, a grieving brother, a skeptical journalist, and one tenacious policeman, the case was only just beginning. The policeman was Inspector Jean-Luc Moreau, a young, dogged, and intellectually restless investigator with the Swiss Federal Police who had been deliberately sidelined from the main inquiry for asking too many uncomfortable questions. The diary entry, with its description of the watch, no numbers, just little spinning stars, haunted his waking hours and infiltrated his dreams. It gnawed at the corners of his rational mind. He began his own, unofficial, off-the-books investigation, chasing leads his superiors deemed fantastical and a waste of resources. His solitary pursuit led him from the soot-stained train yards of Zurich to the fringes of theoretical science, to the dimly lit, absinthe-scented cafes where pre-war occult circles gathered, and finally, to the sealed and forgotten archives of a defunct, disgraced Zurich Research Institute. And this is where the story fractures. This is the midpoint, the pivotal moment where the ground shifts beneath our feet and everything we thought we knew is turned inside out, revealing a truth far more terrifying than any simple accident. Moreau's breakthrough came not from an official police report or a witness statement, but from a stolen, unpublished university thesis he found in a secondhand bookshop. The Institute, known as the Orpheus Group, had been a clandestine collective dedicated to the study of resonant frequencies and their potential effect on the very fabric of space-time. Theoretical nonsense, his superintendent had scoffed. The ravings of mad scientists playing God. But Moreau, piecing together fragments of funding records, private correspondence, and laboratory notes, found a name buried deep within the financial trails: Lord Alistair Harrington, the British industrialist on the trade. Harrington hadn't just been a casual investor. He was the group's primary, secret patron. The meeting in Geneva hadn't been about arms deals. It had been about acquiring a unique, one-of-a-kind piece of technology, a device the Orpheus Group's lead physicist, a man named Dr. Aristhorn, called a harmonic resonator. According to the fragmented, feverish notes Moreau managed to assemble, the resonator was not a weapon. It was a key. It was designed to generate a specific, ultra-low frequency wave, a Schumann harmonic, theoretically capable of temporarily softening or thinning the barrier between dimensions. It was, in Thorne's own grandiose words, a key to unseen doors, a means of peeking behind the curtain of reality itself. Dr. Thorne himself had vanished from his modest Zurich apartment the day after the train disappeared, leaving behind a half-eaten meal and a desk littered with frantic calculations. The only thing of substance left behind was a single, rolled schematic, and on it, sketched in a margin in precise, technical detail, was a device that matched the description from Sophie Loren's diary. A pocket watch, its face replaced with a complex gyroscopic mechanism of orbiting star-like nodes. The man in the black coat wasn't a saboteur or a terrorist. He was Dr. Aristhorn, and he wasn't on the train to destroy it. He was on the train to conduct the world's first live-field experiment. The resonator, a device of terrifying potential, was crated and stored in the baggage car, and Lord Harrington was there not as a passenger, but as an overseer to ensure its secure transport to a private, shielded facility in Italy, far from the prying eyes and ethical constraints of the mainstream Zurich scientific community. Moreau, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and vindication, pieced together the catastrophic sequence of events. Thorne, a man driven by either sublime hubris or a desperate need for validation, had decided to activate the resonator inside the Mont-Vaud tunnel. His notes suggested he believed the tunnel's dense, continuous granite structure would act as a perfect amplification chamber, a waveguide to focus the effect. He had miscalculated catastrophically. The power surge noted by the signalman was the resonator overloading, drawing directly and voraciously from the railway's own electrical grid, siphoning more energy than it was ever designed to handle. The silence that followed was the success and the ultimate damnable failure of the experiment. The Ethelred Express and everyone on it had not been obliterated. They had been translated, shifted out of our plane of existence and into another, adjacent one, trapped in the dimensional equivalent of a locked room between the walls of reality. The official story was a lie, but not necessarily a malicious one. It was a panicked cover for a truth too terrifying, too paradigm-shattering for the public, or indeed any government, to acknowledge. The small circle of authorities who had quietly shut down the Orpheus group and buried all evidence knew that the truth, that a train full of people had been lost not to a rock slide, but to a scientific experiment that had torn a hole in the universe, would cause a panic and a philosophical crisis that would make a simple, tragic avalanche seem like a comforting fairy tale. But the story, like a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest, does not end there. Because if the train was not destroyed, but merely displaced, then the 73 souls aboard were not necessarily dead. They were in a state of profound stasis, trapped between the ticks of a second, a ghost ship sailing on a silent, frozen sea of time, forever on the threshold of destination they would never reach. For decades, the legend persisted, fed by fleeting, unconfirmed, and officially dismissed reports. A radar ghost, a phantom echo of immense density, was seen deep in the tunnel during a geological survey in 1954. A group of university hikers in 1971 swore, with a conviction that unnerved the local gendarmes, that they had heard, just for a moment, the distinct, mournful whistle of a steam locomotive echoing not from the tunnel, but from the solid, unyielding rock face of the Wolf's Jaw itself. They were dismissed as drunkards or tellers of tall tales, their experiences the products of overactive imaginations fueled by local myth and thin mountain air. Then, in the winter of 1998, the impossible happened. A team of surveyors using advanced ground-penetrating radar to plan a new high-speed rail link found an anomaly that defied all geological explanation. Deep beneath the root of the Wolf's Jaw, in a vast subterranean pocket that could not, exist according to all known models of the region's geology, their scanners painted a clear, undeniable image. It was a large, metallic, train-shaped object. It was perfectly intact, sitting neatly on a phantom stretch of track. Subsequent, highly classified expeditions, shrouded in layers of black-budget government secrecy and military oversight, confirmed the unbelievable. They had found the Ethelred Express. It was sitting in a vast, pitch-black cavern, a cavern that showed no evidence of an avalanche, a collapse, or any natural geological process. The train was cold, utterly silent, and when a team, clad in protective suits and armed with cutting tools, finally managed to breach a single, third-class carriage, they found the passengers. They were exactly as they were at 3:17 p.m. on October 14th, 1928. They were not skeletons. They were not dust. They were not decomposed. They were perfectly, terrifyingly preserved, locked in a single, unending moment, as if the flow of time itself had simply stopped for them alone. A man was caught mid-yawn, his hand forever frozen before his mouth. A woman was forever lifting a cup of cold tea to her parted lips. A conductor was paused in the act of checking a ticket, his expression one of bland routine. And in that third-class carriage, a little girl named Sophie Laurent was still looking out the dust-filmed window, her pencil hovering over a fresh, empty page in her diary, her eyes wide with a wonder that had been frozen for 70 years. They were alive in a biological sense. Their bodies were in a state of perfect, absolute suspension. No decay, no cellular death, no aging. But their minds? Their consciousness? Were they aware, trapped in an eternal, silent screen, watching the centuries pass as mere observers to their own perpetual now? Were they dreaming a single, endless dream? The teams of physicists, neurologists, and metaphysicians who were secretly brought to the site had no answers. They could observe the phenomenon. They could marvel at its impossibility, but they could not reverse it. The resonator's effect, it seemed, had been a one-way door, and the key had been lost on the other side. The train and its cavern tomb were immediately deemed a national security crisis of the highest, most silent order. The access tunnels were sealed with reinforced concrete and disguised as geological stabilization projects. The entire area was declared a permanent, no-fly military zone. The truth of the Ethelred Express was buried deeper and more finally than the train itself, a secret too dangerous for the world to know. So, what were we to make of the train that never reached its destination? It is not a simple tragedy of ice and rock. It is a profound and enduring cautionary tale of human ambition, a ghost story written not by the dead, but by the living who were too afraid to acknowledge the terrifying, reality-shattering truth they had stumbled upon. The passengers of the Ethelred Express are not just victims of a disaster. They're unwilling pioneers on the most terrifying frontier imaginable, stranded in the silent, empty space between one heartbeat and the next, a permanent monument to a question that should never have been asked. The official verdict to this day remains Avalanche. It is a clean, simple, digestible end. But the truth is far darker and infinitely stranger. The train did not crash. It crossed over, and somewhere in the deep, dark, silent heart of the mountain, it is still running, forever on time, forever waiting for a signal that will never change, carrying its silent, sleeping cargo of souls into an eternity for which they never, ever bought a ticket. This has been Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories from the edge of the map, where the truth is not just stranger than fiction, it is infinitely more haunting.